Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you're watching, and whenever you're listening, whether it's live or on demand on the podcast or on YouTube or wherever you're at. We're so glad that you're here. Before we get into today's guest, man, I'm so excited. We've been talking for a while. He's just awesome. I can't wait. But before we do that, I want to make sure you're aware of something upcoming because it's really awesome. Because, we like awesome things. So let's pay attention to this real quick. Hey everybody, it is the biggest sale of the year for TechSmith. You don't want to miss it. Coming up on November 29th and November 30th, you're going to find great discounts on all the TechSmith products. It's only available online, so you'll want to check it out. Don't miss it, November 29th and November 30th. Yes, that's right, Cyber Monday. Who doesn't love a good sale? And if you don't have one of the TechSmith products you need to upgrade, go check it out because it's, this is the show. We are TechSmith, so we want you to know about the good deals. And it really is the best deal of the year. By more details, watch your inboxes, watch online. You'll find out more. So with that said, let's get into the real meat of today's show because I am just thrilled. If you don't know Buddy Scalera, you are missing out because he is amazing. So what do you need to know about Buddy? Well, he's an award-winning creator with a focus on marketing, storytelling, and technology. For the past 25 years, he's moonlighted as a comic book writer, which is so cool. And he's the creator of the Comic Book School. He's won 3 awards for the first anthology, including a Content Marketing Institute award. If you don't know Content Marketing Institute, they do great stuff and teach a lot of people a lot of great things. So with that said, let me introduce my favorite comic book author, Buddy Scalera. Yeah, the champion. Buddy, welcome.
Thanks, Matt. You're my favorite video ambassador.
Perfect. I love it.
Like it. Yeah.
So we can just admire each other from afar. But buddy, so thank you for being here because, I think there's this really interesting world that you live in that, bridges these kind of the marketing space and then comic books. And they're not things that come together a lot. In a lot of ways, and I think there's some things that we can learn here. So, but before we get into asking, tell us a little bit more about yourself. So, those who have not heard of you, what else should we know about Buddy Scalera?
Well, Matt, I am a marketer by trade. My background is in journalism, and I got into tech very, very early. But it was while I was working in the comic book industry, building websites for comic book pros, and it just sort of evolved from there. Got into writing comic books, and then one day I realized that the visual storytelling that I was doing on a deadline for comic books wasn't all that different than the visual storytelling that I was doing as a marketer or a website designer. So I kind of combined the both of them, and even though by day I work in marketing and software technology, I still keep a foot in comic books because I think it's a good practice to keep a side project that exercises that part of your creative self.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you ever find yourself at work just thinking, I'd rather be doing comic stuff right now?
Comics are fun. They are fun. They're a great outlet, and it relaxes your brain because you have to think differently. But I will tell you, it has a direct impact on work. The way you think about designing a website or designing slides isn't all that different than the way you would design a visual narrative as a comic book. You have to think in terms of how people interpret content, how they read left to right in a Z pattern. All of these things weigh in. And every single day, we are all telling visual stories, whether we're making videos or websites or slide decks. We have to learn how to think visually, and comics is just a great practice for that.
So let me ask you this, because I am a comic book, I should say I was a comic book reader. I had the comic book subscription, Captain America, when I was a kid, in Incredible Hulk. In fact, I've got a wall over here with comic books. I've got I've got an Excalibur here.
Wow.
Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. It's not, none of these are in great shape. So, whatever.
Look
Iron
at
Man.
That rainbow. That's really nice.
Yeah. I wanted to decorate. I have, What If is super hot right now, right? I've got all this, I think, what was it, the 76, 77 run and the 85 run of What If. So I'm a little bit of a comic book nerd, although I don't know nearly as much. But here's what I want to know, buddy, as I'm geeking out, I'm gushing right now. What is that process of, we say you're a comic book writer. But really, what does that mean? Because what I want to do is kind of set the stage for the things you mentioned. Some of these skills, they apply to websites and design and stuff like that. But really, when you were creating comic books, what were you doing? Because you weren't doing the art, which I think a lot of people think about comic books and they think about the visuals, like the actual art, right? Like drawing, the inking, the coloring. But what was your role?
So, when you're a comic book writer, it's a little bit different when you're writing, let's say, a monthly book. So, let's say you're doing a monthly book. You will generally go on a 2 to 3 word pitch, Deadpool meets the Punisher. Or when I was writing Richie Rich, it's like Richie Rich meets the Loch Ness Monster. And you go and you get an approval from your editor. And then if you get that approval, you write like one paragraph and you just say, hey, here's what I would like to accomplish in this issue. If the editor approves, then you go into like a story breakdown. Depending on how much experience you have with the editor, you might do a quick story breakdown, or you might go into plotting. And comics are very structural, Matt. You know, they're 20 pages or 22 pages depending on the assignment, and no more or no less, right? And you just have to know what you're going to put on each page. You have to know how pages are facing each other. So there's a lot of structure and math that goes into building a comic. And then you have to figure out how I want that story to work. What's the beginning? What's the middle? What's the end? If there's a cliffhanger, how do I hang that cliffhanger? And how many pages do I need from that? So comic writing is a lot of planning before you actually start to commit the stage direction, which is a little bit like screenwriting, but you're a little bit more detailed. So I write page, panel breakdown, dialogue, and then I turn it in. And then in about a month, you get sketched pages back. And then you spot out where the word balloons will go, and then you send it back to the editor, and then in a couple months you have a comic in your hands.
Super fascinating. So it seems like in that process, one of the things I'm taking away from this is those constraints. Tons of constraints, right? If you can only do 20 to 22 pages, you can only have so many panels per page. You're very limited. How does that shape? Is that an important piece, or would you, as a writer, would you prefer not having those constraints?
Matt, I think you key in on something that's extremely important. Every medium has its restrictions and its benefits, right? So we think about live streaming video, right? There's something special about live streaming video versus if you make a film or edit a movie. Video is about time. You cannot watch a video any faster or slower and enjoy the experience as it was intended. But in comics, it's about space. That is, you're constrained by the limitations of the page size, no matter what the page size is. So you write to that medium. So understanding what makes that medium special is how you begin to write for it. So a lot of comic book writers also do some work in video game writing. And I early in my career, I got to write a lot of interactive pieces. So when you think about that, it's not about necessarily the time or the space. It's about the choice and then where the story branches. And then if you branch out, branch up, and you want it to come to a conclusion that is consistent for most readers, or one or two conclusions, you have to write to that. So you write a flow chart. So with comics or videos or video games or any of these different types of mediums, you write to the medium. And I think that it's really important that when you think about what you want to do or what story you want to tell, be it PowerPoint or a video, you're creating for the medium, right? Remember, early YouTube was just people were trying to figure it out. Now we know how to create for YouTube. And I think that that's a really important element to creating in any medium is create for the medium.
Yeah, well, I love that advice because I think it's so easy to get lost in that, right? Like to not think about, oh, this is a video versus a comic book or even PowerPoint. And I think to me that makes just so much sense. And I love how you're breaking this down. And I just want to say, this will become a podcast, and for our podcast listeners, this doesn't mean as much, but thank you for everybody tuning in. We got lots of people from all over the world watching, buddy, so we can say hello to them all. Make sure you drop your questions in the chat, and if you're watching this after the fact or listening later, you can always put a comment or email us at thevisuallounge@techsmith.com. So we're always happy to hear from people. Okay, so my next question. You're creating your stories, and I don't want to be too. Well, I'll be blunt with you, buddy. We can be blunt with each other.
Be blunt.
I feel like really cool you're doing comic books, but like I do a lot of training, and I get kind of the stuff you're saying about story and create to the medium. Um, but it's not marketing. It's not training. It's not, technical documentation. It's, comic books are cool. This other stuff is, like it seems so different. So help me make that connection here. So there's some process stuff you can do. You can create to the medium. What else can we take away? Like, you've been doing this, you moonlighted, you've been doing comic books for a long time. You've been doing marketing for a long time. What else is the intersection there that you've been like, oh, these worlds really aren't too far apart?
Matt, I think what's interesting about comics is that it is one of the mediums that translates very well. That is, if you're dubbing a movie, it's still dubbed. If you're using subtitles, you're still looking and watching, so that it's not exactly the experience. But like PowerPoint comics, you can swap out language, and they're a great visual medium for explaining something. In fact, Stan Lee and also comic legend Will Eisner, legends in comics, both started off in the military, you creating training manuals and helping to translate complex repairs for machinery and reporting into visuals, because people are visual learners. And as we think about people who are visual learners, not everybody's reads on the same reading level, and some people just respond better to pictures and are visual learners. So comics are great for that. I not too long ago, a couple of years ago actually, I wrote for Marvel Comics an educational comic, not targeted towards children, but rather targeted towards people in their 20s with a particular health condition. And what it
Hmm.
does is it enables you to look at the body in different ways. You can dive inside of the body, and the cost of special effects is the same. Like a page costs what a page costs. So if you want to go, deep into the body and show scientific and medical examples, it doesn't cost you anything extra. It doesn't take you any extra time. So the medium is well adapted for rapid communication, but also for translation and transcreation across language barriers and cultures.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I love it seems like the creativity aspects of it as well probably come into play, that inherently, because you can dive into inside the body. We'll take that example, right? Like, you can show the medical things. And in fact, I saw on the chat today is Kevin Thorne. Kevin is a friend of mine who works in learning and development. He creates learning comics for organizations. I've seen one of his pieces of work was being used, I think, in India. It's really fascinating to hear his journey of creating that comic. He does kind of everything, the writing, the illustration. But so you can have this kind of unlimited creativity. How do you make sure that, like in comic book worlds, you said something to me earlier that kind of triggered, stuck with me. Like, you talked about an opportunity you had, and there's this whole world building that was going to have to. There's all these things that have to happen. So in an industry, maybe in a corporation, if you're going to use visuals, you're going to do these, whatever medium it's going to be. How does that piece of the comic book creation maybe apply to your marketing? Are you doing those same types of steps of saying, like, envisioning a world and characters and conflict, or are you just saying, well, this is how it really is? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think those are great questions, Ben. I think there's two elements to what you asked, and I think it's worth unpacking both. So, first, in the pure comic book writing, right? Everything requires some level of exposition. Even if you're saying, like, Peter Parker has to explain that he needs to get medication to Aunt May, and he has to get photos to J. Jonah Jameson, and there's a storm coming, and his suit is wet. One of the things that they did very well in early Marvel Comics, and they still carry through today, is make sure that it's visually interesting. So what you could have is him sitting in a chair thinking about these things, or you can have him swinging across New York City, demonstrating his powers, demonstrating the equipment in his uniform, and then also showing the background and the environment, right? You can see your present day New York City, the time of day, and you can see that he is an acrobat and he's got webs that shoot, right? So for somebody reading that story, it's visually interesting. Now, for the times when I was making short films, we shot the way Kevin Smith shot, which is whatever you had access to. That's why so many different short films or low budget, or they have a scene in a diner. They have access to a diner at 4 in the morning, right? Or a video store. But in comics, you have access to any environment you want. So your responsibility is to make sure that when you're sharing exposition and you're explaining that unless we stop this villain, you better do it in an interesting way. Maybe they're falling out of an airplane, maybe they're fighting, maybe something is happening where they're battling a villain or a monster. Even if it's a nondescript monster, it's still more visually interesting. So then that turns into, what do we do in marketing? Well, I think one of the things that we can take away from that in marketing is that you need to be visually interesting, but you need to tell a succinct, clear story in a short amount of time. People's attention span for your marketing is very limited. So you have to think, what do they want to know right now? So if they're shopping for a vehicle and they're deciding at, the long tail part of their journey is, I want to see what colors are available or what the luxury package looks like versus the basic package. That's your visual storytelling, but you don't have to just show a static one. You can show it in an environment. If it's a four-wheel, you can show it driving off-road, leaping over a cliff or a mountain. These are the kinds of things that we can do as visual storytellers to grab the audience. If we're just telling a pure story, we can make sure that the exposition is interesting. But if we're telling a marketing story, we can make sure that we contextualize and create that moment with them so that they say, I can see what that vehicle can do, and that's why I want it. Or they can just go, well, that's not what I really want. I want a station wagon that, trucks my kids around. Those are the different things that we do as marketers to ensure that we're telling an effective story that's clear to the audience, that helps them make the decision whether or not they want to continue communicating with us or they want to go in a different direction.
So let me ask you this question based on what you've just said, because I'm thinking about this and thinking about, I obviously come from a learning development background more than I do a marketing background, but I'm thinking in those moments, because you want this excitement, no one wants to see, a boardroom conversation of a bunch of superheroes just sitting there like, well, what do we do? It's like, it's super boring. How much of, in any of these situations, do you think that the person experiencing it, so I'm reading a comic book, I'm watching the video, I'm taking in a commercial, how much of it is it key that I relate to that person? If Spider-Man's swinging around, should I feel like I'm somehow connected to Spider-Man, or is that really not something you're thinking about?
No, you think about that all the time. You think about anti-heroes like Tony Soprano or Walter White. They were really villains, but we watched them, so we grew an affinity toward them. The more time you spend with any character, the more you begin to relate to them. If you go pure heroes and villains, no villain sees themselves as a villain. They see themselves as put upon against society, and they are quite literally the hero of their own story. So you have to ensure that when you write these characters, you're writing from a place of truth. What is true to them. You might, let's just use stark terms like, conservative or liberal in the political world. If you are writing as a writer, you have to write truthfully for the character from how they would speak and see the situation. And then the other character that goes against them, you have to speak truthfully. Your responsibility is to tell an effective story. Now, if you're telling a marketing story, obviously your goals are different. But when you're telling a pure story, people will naturally relate to the character they see most on the screen. So if you want somebody to relate to that character, you spend more time with them on screen.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And just so we know, Garth points out to us that Justice League does boardroom meetings all the time.
That's right, Garth. And they're in outer space when they do it, right, Garth?
And I may have responded to that. Of course they do. He's the head of a mega corporation. That's all he knows. Like, CEO that stuff, right? Like, go to meetings.
I love all the comments. I'm looking at some familiar names, and I'm seeing people that I hadn't met. And I know Kevin reached out to me on LinkedIn. I have to get back to him. So it's a good group of people here.
Yeah, we're excited. We're always excited to have people join us live. Of course, it makes things fun. We like the questions. So let's, there's some interesting questions. I don't know that we're equipped to handle. I'm going to put them out there, and I think we'll just kind of put them to the side for now. For our show, there might be more some things that you might want to think about for later, buddy. Like, how do you know where advertising breaks are in comics? We'll probably not talk about that, but it's an interesting question. When do you put the I remember the kids. I loved as a kid loving seeing the, ooh, I could get X-ray specs or whatever. I never did though. How would you give? Another question: how would you get more marketers interested in advertising comic books? Again, probably not on our show. Are we going to be able to talk about that? But let's talk about this for a second because that leads to a question. I think comic books as a medium is really interesting. And I think we're at I don't know, are we at peak comic book like right now? I know we're past the golden age of comics, but like, are we at a time when comic books are okay to like
I think this is the new
use?
golden age, Matt. I think this is the new golden age. Growing up, when I was younger, comics were totally uncool.
Yeah,
And, listen, that, well-known story, Stan Lee changed his name to write comic books because he was embarrassed. And a lot of creators were embarrassed of working in comics. And in a lot of ways, it wasn't an easy business to be in when I was early in my career. But the proliferation of really well-made films and television shows has changed the popular conception of comics. We're seeing a more diverse audience. We're seeing a much more diverse base of creators, and I think it's evolving. It's more inclusive in terms of storytelling. So I think comics are being appreciated by people who previously maybe didn't have thought of them as mature entertainment, but now they're going into the stores and they're saying, wow, there is a comic for me. And it might not be the mainstream superhero. They might find something in the independent shelves where they say, like, wow, I didn't know there was a comic that would be this engaging to me. And then similarly, people just like the people in our chat and the people in our comic book school, who I see some of them here, are now taking comics and making them their own. And they have a vision that far exceeds what was even available 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and now they're taking comics in completely different directions. And Matt, honestly, in different mediums and interactivity and the way they do things. So I think it's a golden age. There's so much amazing content out there. You just have to walk into a comic store or log on to Webtoons or Comixology and just start your discovery.
yeah. Well, I love that, and I think Garth asked a really poignant follow-up question. He says, "What would be adequate training for someone who wants to do a comic book for corporate consumption?" He says, "I've seen it done, and I've seen it done poorly. Is there a checklist of must-have skills?" And I'm starting to kind of think, oh gosh, there's probably a lot of skills involved. But what would you say?
So I would say that Garth's right. It takes about the same amount of time, energy, and money to make a good comic as it does to make a terrible comic. And unfortunately, it's really hard to tell until you're moving along. I think if a corporate client wants to make a comic, I think the most important thing that they can do is go to established professionals who understand the medium. Sometimes you'll see comics that are just they're complete, so people check a box. They're like, "Oh, we completed this. Isn't it great?" But the reality is even the youngest kids can tell the difference between good quality storytelling and poor quality storytelling. I'll give you an example. So when my kids were young, they loved The Little Mermaid, and we played it until the VHS tape wore out. We bought another VHS tape. Then when DVDs came out, we bought the DVD version. And then around the time that the DVD version was out, they started this straight to DVD program, and they came out with
Ah,
The Little
yes.
Mermaid 2, which got, interestingly enough, despite the 2 on it was played only one time ever, and they went right back to the Little Mermaid 1. But even the youngest viewers could tell that even though it looked the same and had similar music, the quality wasn't up to the original one. And I think when people are thinking about making comics in a corporate environment, they should really make sure that they're getting people that fully understand the medium, not amateurs, not first timers, because making a corporate comic is quite a bit harder than you'd realize. And I did a lot for Marvel. I've done a lot of custom, what we call custom comics for Marvel, for clients like Bubblicious or the pharmaceutical company that I did it for. Those are hard books to write, and when you do those comics, it takes probably a more experienced pro than ever to make sure that that comic isn't terrible. So I think the best thing you can do, Garth, is make sure that you're hiring the right people, you're coming in with the right budget, and then just commit to the medium and just say, We're not going to make a comic that talks at people. We're going to make a comic that is engaging and entertaining and more subtly communicates our message, because if it's too overt, you're going to get one read and they're never going to look at it again. So you really got to focus on quality.
I love that advice because I imagine, there's a lot of environments where, they don't, like you talked about earlier, the action, right? You want to put Spider-Man in an interesting situation as he's pondering whatever he's going to do. But in corporate, like a corporate comic, if it's about your corporate setting, like what's exciting? Like just there's so many other ways maybe to convey that same message. So I love that.
Well, and
Can we
also,
talk? Oh, go ahead.
one more thing, but remember, more junior artists will have a hard time imagining full environments and the body. So a lot of junior or early artists will take a straight on view. And I think that, there's a level of acceptability. Like this shot is acceptable in this type of scenario, but it's terribly boring, repeated over comic book pages. So I think one of the things you have to do is you have to have a writer who understands how to pace the medium and an artist who knows how to make it interesting. And then the complete entire team, the inker, the colorist, the letterer, who know how to pull it together into something that's compelling and readable. And I don't think that that's something you should be careless with. Again, I go back to, I was hired a lot through Marvel to do custom comics for clients, but I've done some direct for clients where somebody paid me and my partner to create comics for them, but we were the same creators, we were the same Marvel creators. But I think the reality is when you get really down to it, you want somebody who fully understands the medium. Like Matt, cutting a video is different really than editing a video to make
Mm-hmm.
it the best it could possibly be. And anybody can cut, but really to make something special, I think that takes practice.
Yeah, great analogy, especially for our show and our audience, because you're absolutely right. Editing a video is a different process than cutting a video. I can chop out bad parts, mess ups all day long, but what am I putting in there that is meaningful, that brings engagement, that enhances or enlarges whatever the message is that we're trying to convey, and that is a different skill, and one that like as me as an instructional designer, as a marketer, I see that as like, yeah, I can do some stuff, but when I talk to people that are really good and I see their work, it's a level different, right? It's completely different than even what I can do, who I think, I'm okay. Like I have enough experience, I've seen enough that I can do pretty good, but you get those people that are just really good at it. They're going to
And it
make
takes
something completely
practice,
different.
right? It
Hmm.
takes practice. Like I use Camtasia and I use Snagit, and I practice a lot with Snagit. I use Camtasia mostly for cuts and titles and bumpers. And in fact, on the Comic Book School YouTube page, there are some videos that we've made with Camtasia. But the more I use it, the more I get better at it. But there are simply people who are talented and skilled. And I think if you're going to spend the same amount of time, money, and energy, I would focus on the quality. And sometimes you just have to go outside of your group, just because you know, uh, you know, that person in the lunchroom sketches superheroes all day doesn't necessarily mean they'll tell an effective story for your corporate brand.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this, buddy, because I'm curious. You've had the privilege, I'll say, of writing for some well-known characters. You've mentioned Deadpool. I know you've written for Richard Rich. I don't even know if there's others in there. Probably are. And these are characters that came before you, right? These were not your original creation of character. So, Deadpool in particular, I think probably people know from the movies. He's got a certain style, tone, irreverence. He's the character that breaks the fourth wall. There's things known about him. And you have to then mold Buddy Scalera's vision of that to fit the character, right? You couldn't go and just make a new, make all of a sudden Deadpool's the nicest guy in the world or something like that, right? So I'm thinking about this, like, you got to stay in line with the character, the tone. What are some ideas or tips that you have that might help? Because I think that's true for corporations too, right? If I speak for TechSmith often, I write for TechSmith, and I have to match tone, style, brand for someone that TechSmith's not Matt Pierce. We are different. Believe it or not, folks, we are different. It's hard. I know it's hard to believe sometimes, and sometimes maybe we're not that different. But how do you do that? Because I think that's probably a skill in of itself. But what advice would you give for people trying to
Yeah,
match tone for something that's maybe not their style, not them.
It looks like somebody said, Christy, I'm late. What did I miss? Should we just start from the beginning?
Yes,
Is that all right?
absolutely. We, Christy, we'll catch you up on
Okay, start
replay.
right from the beginning. Anyway, kidding. I think when you're working for a corporation, usually there's a mission statement, there's a brand Bible, um, there are guidelines. There are very similar things when you're working in a comic book, and it is your responsibility as a creator, not just the writer, but the artist as well, um, to serve the character and the story world that has come before you. And you're required to do a certain amount of research, as you should, and you should be serving the audience because they're the ones that are going to be buying the product, and comics aren't free. So, they want a good story. So it's your responsibility, and you really have a contract with the audience. So if somebody reads a comic book that I wrote and they hate it, they're not going to wait around month after month to see if I write better stories. They'll just drop it, right? So we do have a pretty big responsibility to maintain the continuity and the consistency of those characters, understand what they expect when they get a Marvel comic versus a comic where I've created the entire world. Like my own comic book project is one is called Apocalypse Boulevard. And that comic is exactly what I want it to be. And there's no boundaries. I create what I want. But then after I've done it, I have to be consistent, right? So people are
Hmm.
expecting something out of Apocalypse Boulevard, they're expecting something out of Deadpool, and they're expecting something out of the press release or the corporate videos that we are creating on behalf of our employers. So I think they're very similar. It's an immersion process, it's a respect for the materials, and then it's also a respect for the audience that you will give your best, and they don't know if it's going to be good until they're done with it. So it's built on mutual respect. You have to really respect your audience.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and I love that idea of the consistency, right? Like you set it out. This is what we are, and that's not to say it can't change or evolve, but that's not an overnight. Like we've flipped a switch from this to that, right?
Hmm.
You
Right.
can't do that. So in that process of writing these characters, can we talk about it? I don't want to, we don't have to talk about them specifically, but like that evolution, is that typically mostly I just want to geek out about comic books, buddy. Sorry.
I could do this all day. It doesn't matter. We can
Like,
do this for two
let's
hours.
talk
I
about
don't care.
the evolution because I think brands go through evolutions too, right? Like, I've seen it. I've been a TechSmith long enough. I've seen us evolve. So, how does that happen in character story? Because, like, what are the things as a writer you're thinking about? And then, we'll of course, we'll take it and apply it to brands and other things. But I'm curious, like, or do you like say like this is the world? Because I'm guessing I know you're not the last writer to write for Deadpool, and sometimes there's kind of these hard resets it seems in the comic book world. But like, you know, do you get to take that character to where you want to go, or like, are there rules? We'll never do. Kevin Feige's got for Marvel Universe, right? Cinematic Universe. He's got rules. You can't do this. You can't do this. Everything else is maybe fair game. So.
Well, it's a great question. So I'll give you the Deadpool example. So I was breaking in as a writer, and I really wanted to write Deadpool. It was just such a great character. And I guess they were around issues in the 30s or whatever. And I'm talking to the editor, and the editor was somewhat receptive. I had built a relationship, and I was pitching ideas. Deadpool will do this. Nah. Deadpool will do that. Nah. And then I saw that one of the writers that was on the title was going to be concluding it. And I said, can I take over with this pitch? And the editor actually said, that's a good pitch. But at that point, I wasn't experienced enough to take over a monthly comic. So I actually talked to that particular writer. His name's Jimmy Palmiotti. And I said, hey, would you stay on a couple more issues? And he said, well, what's your idea? So I pitched him the idea. This is what will happen with Deadpool. And he goes, oh, that's not bad. So we kept working. Now, this version of Deadpool is, as you noted, Matt, a little bit different maybe than the current version or the version that's on the screen. It's times change, types of humor change, the way you outline a story changes. So every character goes through evolutions. If you think back, early Batman was very dark, and then in the 60s it was goofy because it was based on the 66 Batman series. It was ridiculous. And then at some point in the mid 70s, Denny O'Neil brought it back and made grim and gritty, and then Frank Miller went even darker. So, your characters go through times and changes, but when you're pitching to an editor, you're pitching a vision and a voice. It has to maintain the core of that character, but what are you going to do that we have never seen before? What are you going to do that brings excitement to the reader? And always the key thing is what has never been done before. So, you can go through the catalog at that point. Like I said, it was in the mid 30s or something, into the 40s of Deadpool. And I went, well, this has never been done before. And that was actually the hook that brought me in as a writer. And then once you're in the door and you're doing a monthly book, you have a different relationship with the editor. And then you can start to pitch different ideas, and you can talk to other writers about crossing over. And that's what we ended up doing with The Punisher, some of the most popular issues we did. So it's a matter of getting in the door. You got to get in any way you can, but usually the best way to get in is to publish an independent comic book. Show an editor, yeah, I can do a 20-page story on a deadline, or I can do 22 pages. I can do a 6-issue series. And then you hand it to them and they go, oh, cool. But if you're just another person walking up to them and saying, I've got an idea for Spider-Man. Yeah, you and everybody else. But now you prove it, right? You prove it. And then if you write something the editor writes and they go, I see that little spark of magic, that's when you get the door open for you. So that's what we do at Comic Book School. We try to help people to get that writing experience, work through their kinks, work through all their cliches and bad storytelling, and they begin to hone it and be refined. And that refinement is where we're going, where we then take people to the next level and get them in front of editor. Actually, one of our students just recently, after working with us in Comic Book School almost 2 years, is seeing his first official public paid credit, which is a great thing.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Can we talk a little? Let's go back to the visuals a little bit, because I think there's some opportunities here. Because pre-show we were talking, and you had shared some visuals with me, and I think this is really important because obviously comic books, the words are important. I don't want to discredit the words, right? Those are important, but the visuals carry so much weight. And I think that's true for a lot of things that we do in business and learning and development. Visuals are important to help convey those messages, to emphasize key things. So what would you have to say? Because obviously it's a unique medium, working in comic books, as video is a unique medium. What can we learn from how comic books are laid out and designed to help us to understand, like, what should we be thinking about when we're creating our own visuals?
I think it's a great question, Matt. I think one of the key things that is important to note is that we read in a Z pattern, right? Our eyes track left to right, then top to bottom. And anytime you know how the eye tracks, and I'm talking about Western culture. I know that Eastern culture might read the opposite direction, but I mean, for many of the people that are listening today, we're going to read in a Z pattern. So I'm going to just show something real quick, if that's okay with you, Matt.
Yeah,
The
let's bring it
idea
up.
is that I'm going to show you. Now, I don't know if they can see this. Can they see
I will bring it up on the screen here in just a second. Let me switch over to it because I gotta
These are
assign
my
it.
vacation photos. Is that what's showing?
We're getting there. I'm finding the where I gotta find the. We had all this planned. I promise we had all this planned.
We
Now I
did.
gotta
We
just
worked
find.
it out ahead of time, and
I gotta
my
find
comic book school people are going to make fun because it's usually me that can't find the screen. They're gonna.
I just gotta find the right shot. There we go. Here we go. Nope,
So
that's me.
that's you.
We don't want me. We want. Nope, that's my screen. So we're getting there. We're getting
Those are
closer.
your vacation photos.
That's my vacation. You can see all the questions I'm going to ask. So let me switch back here real quick because that's not what I wanted.
While we're waiting, Matt, I should tell everybody every Tuesday we go live. Comic Book School owns Tuesday night on YouTube, where we talk about educational bits. So all the people that are asking questions here can join us on the Comic Book School YouTube channel, where we will answer all of your questions. And I see a black screen.
We're getting there. I'm working through what to
We're getting
show, and I want to show. We're gonna do
Look
this.
at Redheaded Ed.
Oh, look at that!
Redheaded Ed
It's
makes
getting
fun.
it's getting even better. There we go. I
There
can
you
see.
go.
I
All
did
right.
it.
You did a great job. Okay, so I think one of the things that I'd really like to unpack with your audience is the idea that the eye is tracked in a very specific way, especially in older comics. They did a great job and they spent a lot of time because if you can think back, this wasn't photoshopped. They manually laid down Aquaman. They manually laid down 12 cents and all of these other elements. Now, when you're doing that, there's a lot of intent. And comics were not, you couldn't email the file. So when I'm doing an analysis and I want to understand what's happening on the page, the first thing I do, Matt, is I drop the color. Now you could do this in Snagit, you could do this in PowerPoint, you can do this in a lot of different ways. But what this does is it takes away the eye candy, really. So if you wanted to think about how the eye would track, the way I would suggest is that, the eye was designed to look at the DC logo and the 12 cent. Now, Aquaman is where it is because on a comic rack, you could only get the top third of the page. So they wanted to make sure that they got the Aquaman logo, and then the eye tracked to the end of Aquaman. And then first thing you would see is "Don't worry, Aquaman." Now your eye doesn't continue here. These two characters aren't looking at the main character. They're actually looking off screen. They're deprioritized. So "Don't worry, Aquaman." So the next thing your eye will do is a Z pattern. You see the Z. Tide will be up, so you see this. Okay, so your eye has landed here. Now there's no place else to go, a lot of negative space. So the next dialogue, and you can literally see the tail pointing at the word "in about an hour," and then to Aquaman's face, and then declaring, "But if I don't have water, I die in 2 minutes." Okay, and then you go to the right side of the page. Now, what's notable about this is it's reinforced that this is Aquaman. If I'm looking at this further, oh, okay, that's Aquaman. The tide will be up in about an hour, and you go, okay, in about an hour. But if I don't have water in 2 minutes, I die in two. If I don't have water, I die in 2 minutes. This is a really important thing because what it does is it sets the tone, and you say to the reader, if you buy this issue, here's what's inside. Here's the Z pattern. Let's do it one more time. And this is a really good example because this is done by a master comic artist. So we do the color, Matt, and then we say, okay, well, let's just drop the color so we can really see what's going on. This is what we would see as creators. Like we would see this art and we would say, okay, what are we going to do here? So if the viewers are tracking along, if they see the same Z pattern, let's go through it together. So go across to Superman. The eye meets at the end, right? Now you can see there's a figure in the extreme foreground. And the first thing you can do, there's nothing else you can do. You see these hips, and then you say, Supergirl. Okay, that just reinforced. He's talking to Supergirl. He is looking at Supergirl. Have you gone mad? And you can see even from the font. The font has changed, all bold. Have you gone? And then they've changed the font. And now you've smashed the bottle city of Kandor, so your eye goes over here. There's no place else to go, and killed 7 million people. And now you know what that glass bottle is, right? Like when you saw this, you could take this in a half a second. But now you understand what's going on here. Interestingly enough, the artist signs his name right here in the place where the call to action is to turn the page. And that there creates the imperative, and you remember that artist's name. But without this, you wouldn't know this is Supergirl. You wouldn't know that she's just killed 7 million people. You can see Superman looking at her. So the Z pattern is very clear here. You can kind of see a macro Z pattern, and you can see from his urgency that this is not a good thing. And then I'm going to do one more thing, Matt, and then we'll go back and I'll show you. If you look at this cover and you had to think, how would I write this? Here's literally how I might write it. So I would say cover one, to the top left logo, line of DC Superstars tagline right there. Superman logo, purple offset reds and blues. Top right, price is 30 cents. Issue 207, internal code. And then I'd note extreme foreground of Supergirl smashing the bottle city of Kandor. Shards of glass explode on the ground, do not show her face, but clearly this is Supergirl. Superman in deep background, rushing to stop her. His pained face shows his inability to stop her. And then he says, Supergirl, and you can see how we do the accents. We underline them. You smashed the bottle city of Kandor and killed 7 million people. Tell me which one, Matt, is more compelling. Of course, we're attracted to the picture, so I'll pause there for a second.
Oh yeah. Oh man, this is so fantastic, and I love using the Z pattern, and I love there's so much going on here. Dropping out of the color, so it's not persuading it. You're like
Right.
you're really getting to see where it goes. So this is all really fantastic, and I imagine this works with not just comic books, but most images, right? Understanding the images and what that pattern looks like. So let me go back to there. There we
Yeah.
are.
Well, I mean, In the hands of a master creator, of an experienced artist, who's somebody who's taken the time to really train their eye, they will control the eye. And that's the difference between, like, the earlier question. What's the difference if somebody, well, nobody said that, but, like, if you have an inexperienced creator, they don't know how to control the eye. They don't know how to tell an evocative story. They might not know where the inflection point should be, and how to really draw the emotion out. And I think that that's why it's important to work with experienced people. And for you and all of the people who come to comic book school and to the other places where we learn how to create comics, is to take the time, work through your craft. Don't rush it. Like, really take the time to learn how to make effective comic books, like Little Mermaid 1 versus Little Mermaid 2. There is a perceptible difference. People might not be able to point to it, but they have the feeling that one has a better quality than another. And I think it's really important for people to take seriously the learning journey that you have to go on to be an effective storyteller.
Yeah, and we see storytelling in so many things. It's so valuable. I was at a small little conference this week, and it was for instructional designers, learning developers, and I went to a session about storytelling. And the amount of emotion in a very quick amount of time this person was able to evoke, like about this quick. It was like a 3-line story about this woman who was basically getting this guy fired, and how and everyone's room's like, oh, we hate her. It was like, just, it was amazing what good story can do to convey
And it
information.
takes practice, right? It takes practice, right?
Yeah.
You go to see a comedian that's working out their first act versus a master comedian who has figured out how to distill the story down. If you see people who are effective storytellers at a pub, and then there's another level where they're effective storytellers on a Netflix special, these things take practice. So I think anybody can do it. You just have to be willing to commit yourself to being a student.
Yeah. We've got 2 questions I want to try to get to, and then we're going to be in for speed round because we're running out of time. So the first question, what are the 2 top skills you think comic books can share to improve visual brands and marketing?
I think that comic books can help you to contextualize your brand in a way that is much more expensive and much more difficult in other mediums. Comics can tell you placement and time. So learning how to use that visual medium can help people to appreciate how to enjoy the brand, but also do things like fix the brand. If you've ever seen, like, IKEA instructions, they're a nightmare. There's no reason why IKEA instructions couldn't be made into a good comic book, right? If you can watch a video on YouTube and learn how to fix your car, well, a comic is actually even better for that. So I would advocate for brands to think very carefully about ways that they can utilize this medium that's familiar to all of us. And let's face it, Matt, this is an inexpensive medium compared to other production mediums, and it's much faster. So I think what we need to do is really think about what is the power of that medium, the ability to open a comic, leave it there, and fix an engine or assemble furniture. That can be an effective way that helps a brand make people feel good about assembling furniture or building a car or cooking a meal. These are all things that comics are very good at and can truly help brands to create a differentiated experience as well, Matt, because how often do you get a comic packaged with something that you have to put together? Way better. Like, look at Lego instructions and old model instructions. Are essentially comics.
Yeah. So just so you know, I may have met guys from IKEA that actually write the manuals for building stuff, and they talked about the process. So fascinating. So
Yes, but tell
fascinating.
them that we can make comics for them, and they'll be even better.
I don't doubt it, but then you don't have the puffy guy that doesn't have any real semblance of personality. So I've got another question. I've asked Kevin to elaborate a little bit because I think there's probably the time we need to narrow down a little bit. But his question was this: how do you write an instructional comic for digital storytelling? And I'm not sure exactly. Maybe you understand what that fully means. But Kevin, if you're watching, I'd love to help us narrow it down. Because I mean, are there differences digital storytelling versus kind of the comic book medium? Like,
Oh yeah, I mean, Kevin, I think if you're thinking about the delivery mechanism, like webtoons, which is clearly designed for a mobile audience and vertical, and many comics today are designed for the mobile flip, right? You're going to do the mobile flip, but also comics now are designed and chopped. So when you're on a mobile device, be it a comic, but be it an iPhone or an iPad, you could look at the panel by panel, and you can also see little animations and even sound effects. So today you can create something that you couldn't create years ago. But the magic of a print comic is that a person has to be complicit in the reading of a comic. When you open up a comic and it spreads like this, you can legitimately see the entire story. But if you follow page by page from the left side, panel, 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 next page, panel, 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 you have complied and gone along with the storytelling. When you're on a digital medium and all you can do is flick to panels, that's a different type of contract that you have with the reader. All are equally valid as storytelling platforms, but the way you write to them needs to be a little different, especially if you're writing a page and the page will have a clear layout and be printed like this versus something that will just come up panel at a time. And I think we are still in the learning process, many of us, myself included, in writing more effectively toward that digital medium. But I think it's an ongoing journey of discovery and acceptance that we're all making it up together.
Yeah. And Kevin does point out that, instructional comments probably have interactive elements. So you're not only adding in the visuals, you're adding in maybe these other interactive
Hyperlinks,
pieces.
call outs. Yeah, you can do hyperlinks and call outs and, a definition with an eye, right? Like all of those things are very possible in digital that print can't do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking, I know Kevin, he wouldn't do this, but the comic book quiz questions you're going, what happens next? I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities. Interactive comic books. That was the whole premise of the movie Big, right? He developed an interactive comic that you could choose your own adventure. So,
well, Kevin, make sure in the show comments you put your website so I can go check out what you're doing.
Yeah, Kevin's got some awesome stuff. I've seen it. Kevin's been on the show actually. You guys are now both Visual Lounge alum.
Kevin, yeah, we're alumni.
That's right. So, okay, it is time. We need to move things along. So we're gonna go into our speed round questions. If your first time watching a show, these are quick answers. Maybe sometimes not so quick questions because I talk too much. But here we go. Speed round. All right, buddy. First question. I know who has employed you to some degree, but DC or Marvel as a reader?
Marvel.
Good man. We don't want to get everybody mad. It's whatever you like. It's good. Okay. What is the favorite comic storyline that you wrote?
I would say the Deadpool storyline with Jimmy Palmiotti, where we write Deadpool versus the Punisher.
Yeah. Classic battle, right? Hardcore. Okay, what's the favorite comic book? These are all comic book questions because, again, I just want to nerd about comic book stuff. Favorite comic book storyline that you didn't write?
Gosh, I would have to say The Killing Joke by Alan Moore and Brian Boland. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Rachel Rising also, to throw an indie comic in there.
Okay. And neither of those I'm familiar with, so I'm sure they're excellent if you're recommending them. Since comic books are inherently, there's lots of history, there's lots of things that you could do, not just for comic books, but in your work life. Where do you turn for inspiration?
Real life, Matt. I think just getting to know people and being a good listener. And I always carry around my notebook. I actually have a TechSmith notebook. So I carry around, I have two TechSmith swag. We didn't talk about this. This is my TechSmith swag. This is my.
Most people probably don't know the card. We made a card game.
You made a card game, and I'm in that card game.
I am also, you know what? It's over on the wall here. I am also in the card game. I'm a character in a card game. Yeah.
So inspiration comes from real life, man. I mean, it's about people and interactions, what people want, what their hopes, dreams, and desires, and then what gets in their way. That's where the real story is. So, being a good listener and listening to other people tell their personal stories, I think is where I get most of my inspiration.
Yeah, I love that because I imagine as fantastical as comic books are, there has to be some grounding in reality to make it to connect, right? Because if I can't if I can't see myself in the hero or the anti-hero or whatever, I don't care, right?
Yeah. It's all about finding that story. Star Wars came down to the story of Luke Skywalker, right? This wonderful narrative was pulled together. It didn't matter how epic it was. It was still about this person on a personal growth journey, and I think that's where I get my inspiration.
Yeah. Although, there's so many Star Wars things now. It's not, it used to be Luke Skywalker, and then they tried to do some other stuff, but it should have still been Luke Skywalker. But now we've got some fantastic
Is
stories.
this your get off the lawn moment, Matt?
That's
Like
right.
you like get off my lawn, get off my Star Wars.
Hey, I was, we talked about age, and I won't say it here, but I went to the first Star Wars. I don't remember it, but I was there in the theater. So I may have been less than a month old, but whatever.
But you went.
My parents took me. My mom's a sci-fi fan. Okay, last question for you. I'm going to warn you. Everyone says this is the hardest question we ask in Speed Round. We ask it of all of our guests, so we're not just picking on you. What's a question you'd like to ask me?
I would like to ask you what video you think is the best edited movie ever to come out.
Interesting. Best edited movie. So I'm going to be really honest here. I talk a lot about videos, but I am not like the movie, like Andy Owen, who we have on the show, and he works for TechSmith as a video producer. He can talk about movies. Another guy that used to work at TechSmith, who's helped us a lot with the TechSmith Academy, Barrett Baxter. He could talk about movies. I'm not that guy. I wish I was more like when I remember being a kid. I could tell you the name of actors, what movie, like I could do all that, and I just kind of grew away from it. But I love film. I love making videos. I love instructional design. But I'm not like I just want to enjoy the movies I watch, so I don't analyze them. But gosh, what's one that's really well edited? Gosh, that's really hard because all my mind is going through all the different genres and different eras. I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I'm gonna have to think about this.
You know what I would say, Matt? Is
What would you
probably one
say?
of the best edited movie is an indie movie that came out of Germany in the late 90s. I think it was called Run Lola Run.
All
And
right.
it was a wonderful film about a woman who had 15 minutes to raise $50,000 to save her boyfriend's life. So the 90-minute movie is about a 15-minute where Lola has to run to save her boyfriend's life, and it's really all in the editing and the music and the sound design. It's just such a great film.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Kevin makes a good point. I'm more of a board game geek than I'm a movie buff, believe it or not. Let's talk Dungeons and Dragons.
We have the Thanos game at my house. It's fantastic. If you've ever played the MCU Thanos game, we love it.
Okay. I'll have to check that out. I love a good board game, and I love role-playing games. So that's probably like if you're asking me where I spend my time, I actually
That's
spend
what
way
I'm
more
asking.
time.
Matt,
Yeah.
where do you spend your time?
Yeah, perfect. We'll edit the last part out. Don't worry. Yeah, I actually, Dungeons and Dragons is where I spend a lot of time in world build. So it's very similar to comics, like world
That's right.
building, character creation. We play a weekly game at work. And I've got people that we've played. We just finished a campaign after like 2 years. Jessie O'Donnell, who you know well, is one of them,
Love Jesse. Jesse, big shout
and
out to Jesse.
she's in the chat helping out. And so that's where I spend when I'm not doing my real life stuff, like family and community stuff. I'm spending time thinking about how to kill off the players in my game.
I don't blame you. True or false? True or false that TechSmith every year gives out the Jesse O'Donnell Award, like for most exceptional, awesome employee, and every year Jesse wins. Is that true?
I would say she wins every single year. I might be
Okay.
giving it to her every single year, but uh, we'll take it because she's fantastic, and she's in the chat. She always helps out every week, and she's so generous. I say she has to put up with more than everybody else because she listens to me every week, buddy. Every
And a
week.
shout out. Who's the guy with the epic beard who makes all your training videos?
Jason Vlad, yeah, Jason's awesome.
He is awesome. I have used his videos more times than I can count to like quickly figure out something in Camtasia. I just call him Epic Beard Guy. I don't know if that's his official title, but
It
I
is
think he's
now.
great. He's
It,
so entertaining and he's so informative. Tell him I'm a fan.
All right, we will do that. Well, buddy Scalera, thank you so much for spending so much time with us and going through and just sharing your knowledge. We always appreciate hanging out with you, and I've loved all the comic book chat that we shared with everybody else and the stuff that we got to talk about pre-show. So we want to just thank you for that. And with that said, just want to remind everybody, we go live every week. Next week, I know for the podcast people, it doesn't make as much sense, but we'll be live on Monday because it's a holiday in the US. So we're going to go early. We're going to be talking about gears and gifts, things that you might want to get your favorite video creator or pick up for yourself if you're looking to upgrade your stuff, because we always talk about leveling up here on the Visual Lounge. You could level up your gear, make it a little bit better. The week after that, so the week after whatever next week is, we are going to have Megan Torrance and Jess Jackson, and we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion in images and media. So I think that's going to be a really important conversation. Obviously, it's a big, important topic we want to be having to make sure we're representing people appropriate and well in the media that we're creating and that we're using. And then we got more great stuff coming down the pipe almost every week. And at some point, because of the holidays, we'll take a break. But with that said, you know what I'm going to say. Whatever you're doing, if you're making images or video, however you're trying to get better, we hope you take a little time to level up every single day.